All right. Then we can start, if it's okay for you.
Yes.
Everyone. Hello, everyone. Hello, Estelle.
Hello, Thomas.
Hello.
We are very happy to host you, Susanne, tonight. As I was saying in backwards, I'm gonna be someone very eager to listen to your talk for my next job appointment and assignment. So I will listen carefully to what you will tell us tonight. And we already have you on a panel, maybe 1 year or more than 1 year, before the end of the world, I think it was.
I can't remember, was it yet last year or the year before? So
maybe 2 years ago.
Time is flying.
Yeah. But I really liked your interventions at the time, so very happy to have you. I will stay like this and let you, maybe Estelle, you want to give some rules or
just a few words for our participants. So we have a Q&A block on Zoom, so don't hesitate to put your question in it, and do not hesitate also to put your vote if you find some interesting questions. So we will take all the questions at the end of the talk for Susanne, so do not hesitate to put it, and have a good talk, and thank you again, Susanne.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm feeling quite honored to be the first. Be unmuted.
Yes, perfect.
Thank you so much. So yeah, thanks a lot for attending my talk about building adaptive systems for fast flow of change. So most initiatives that try to change or to optimize a system are usually directed at improving parts taken separately. And they tend to focus on local optimization of the separate parts of the system. But from a system thinking lens, local optimization of separate parts will not improve the performance of the whole. Dr. Russell Eckhoff, one of the pioneers of the system thinking movement, stated that a system is more than the sum of its parts. It's a product of their interactions. And the way parts fit together, they determine the performance of a system, not on how they perform taken separately. And he also claims that if the systemic nature of an organization is ignored, the effort of improving and changing that system are doomed to failure. So when building systems in general, we are facing the challenge between building the right thing and building the thing right. Building the right thing addresses questions such as how aligned is our solution to our user needs? Are we creating value for our customers? Have we understood the problem, and do we share a common understanding? Building the thing right, on the other hand, focus on efficiency, like, for example, efficiency of some engineering practices. And it's not only crucial to generate and create value for our customers, but also being able to deliver that value. And about how fast we can deliver changes and how fast and easy we can make a change effective and adapt to new circumstances. And so the one does not go without the other, but as Russell Eckhoff points out, doing the wrong thing right is not nearly as good as doing the right thing wrong. By considering the whole and having effectiveness and efficiency in mind to build the right thing right, we need to have a holistic perspective to build adaptive systems. And one approach that I would like to share with you today is combining the three perspectives of business strategy with Wardley mapping, software design and architecture with domain-driven design, and team organization with team topologies in order to design and build and evolve adaptive systems that are optimized for fast flow of change. So let's start first with Wardley mapping, one of the first perspectives. And Wardley mapping itself, it's a strategic framework invented by Simon Wardley, a researcher from the UK. And Wardley mapping helps to design and evolve business strategies based on situational awareness and movement following a strategy cycle. And the strategy cycle itself, according to Simon Wardley, is a representation of change and how we need to react to that change. The strategy cycle starts with the purpose, the why of our business, and it addresses the questions, why are we doing what we are doing? And it shall describe why customers should choose us over others. And so the purpose itself, that shall inspire the customer to act and also have an impact on the value chain that I will address in a little later. The next section of the strategy cycle is the context-specific landscape. And the landscape itself, that is a description of the environment we as an organization are operating in. And this landscape is represented by a Wardley map that visualizes the evolution of a value chain. So let's go into an example. Let's go into the concept of a Wardley map by creating one that is representing the landscape of a conference event planner solution as a fictitious example. A Wardley map in general is composed of a y-axis and an x-axis, and the y-axis itself represents the value chain. Behind every user need, there is a value chain, and to create a value chain, it starts off with identifying your users. So who are your users? Users can be customers, shareholders, staff, business partners, internal users, and so on. In this example of the conference event planner solution, our users could be the conference organizers and the speakers. So after having identified the users, next step is to identify the user needs. And the user needs, they are addressing the problems the users would like to get solved by you. The user and the user needs themselves, they are representing the anchor of the map that all subsequent components are relating to and are at the top of the value chain. So in our example, the conference organizer would like to manage a call for paper, a CFP, that the speaker then can submit their session proposal to. The organizers would like to evaluate the submitted session proposals and would like to build and publish a schedule out of the accepted sessions and communicate with the speakers along the CFP process, and also sign up and sign in into the solution as well. The next question to derive this value chain is what are the components that are necessary to fulfill the user needs, either directly or indirectly by facilitating other components in that value chain? And how do these components depend on each other, and what position do they have in the value chain? So at the top, we have those components that are most visible to the users, where users are touching your system or interacting directly with your system. And at the bottom, it gets more and more invisible to the user. And the value to the user and the visibility, they are closely correlated. So the more visible a component is, the more it is on the upper part of the value chain, the more value it provides to the user. So in our example, at its core, we have the conference event planner component fulfilling the user needs directly. And later on, we will split this conference event planner component into smaller parts when we're talking about the second perspective of domain-driven design. This conference event planner component needs some sort of data storage to store the state of the domain models, and the data storage component has less visibility to the user, so it is lower on the has a lower position on the value chain itself. For searching functionality, we might need a search engine. We want to have event-driven communication, event-driven architecture in place. For that reason, we need a message broker. The conference event planner component, including search engine, message broker, and data storage component, they need an environment in which their software is executed, the compute platform, and this compute platform is running on top of a virtual machine. So at this point, we have identified the value chain with its related independent components. And the next step is that now each component of this value chain is going to be plotted along an evolution axis going from left to right. So at the left, we have Genesis with brand new things that have never existed before, then custom build, then product and rental, such as off-the-shelf products or open source software, and then things on the right like commodity and utilities. And the movement of a component along the x-axis is determined by its stage of evolution. And while the components evolve through the stages, there are characteristic changes. And we can use these characteristics, for example, how well understood and well defined, how stable or how rare constantly changing a component is, in order to determine its stage of evolution. I will come back to that one on the next slide. So at this moment, let's say our conference event planner component shall go into custom build. We are planning to use open source software solutions for search engine and data storage and message broker. They go then in the product and rental evolution stage. Each of them is going to be packaged in container as compute platform, and which are running on a cloud hosted virtual machine, which goes then in commodity and utility evolution stage. So the next step of the after we have understood our landscape visualized with a Wardley map, the next step of the strategy cycle are the climatic patterns. And the climatic patterns themselves, they describe external forces and rules influencing our landscape, over which we have no control. They are happening without our influence. But on the other side, understanding the climatic patterns allows us to see how the landscape is changing. And some of these climatic patterns can be anticipated. That means we can prepare for them, and this gives us a kind of strategic advantage to our competitors. So let's look at some of climatic patterns. I guess there's a catalog of at least 30 climatic patterns. Let's look at an extract of it that are affecting our landscape. One pattern is that the map is never static but very dynamic. So everything evolves from left to right through the forces of supply and demand competition. And as the component evolve, their characteristic change, as I mentioned earlier. So going from left, from an uncharted domain, the uncertain, unpredictable, rare, and constantly changing domain on the left, and becoming more and more industrialized when we're moving to the right, where we have at commodity and utility, the very well-known, the common, the stable, commonly understood and ordered domain on the right. Another climatic pattern is efficiency enables innovation. And so the industrialization of one component enables, for example, that new features for existing products can appear, or that other components can co-evolve, or that new components can emerge. And it's the genesis of new components that enables new user needs, that creates future source of value, future source of worth. So in general, the evolution of one component and its efficient provision enables the innovation of other components. And let's address some other climatic patterns. And to describe them, I would like to travel with you through some time and going. So let's look at a short video clip illustrating how the market shares of mobile phone providers have evolved over the years from 2005 to 2017. So as you could see, Nokia has been dropped from the market. So within only 6 years, Nokia's market share has dropped by more than 90%. And this is kind of stunning if you consider that Nokia released its first smartphone-related N series in 2005. That was 2 years before Apple came out with their first iPhone. So why did Nokia encounter such a massive loss of market shares, even though they were very innovative? So this brings us back to the climatic patterns influencing the landscape. So one of the reasons and one of the climatic pattern is, so with more competitors turning up targeting the smartphone market, the landscape has changed. So competitors' action will change the game and will influence the landscape. And software and mobile phone became more and more important. And Nokia itself was at its heart rather a hardware company than a software company, and they underestimated the increasing importance of software. Another reason of Nokia's decline was their inertia to change created by past success. So even though they introduced the smartphone in series in 2005, they were still so successful with their old cell phone model that they were very reluctant to fully transition to the new smartphone era. So another climatic pattern, inertia to change, created by past success, cannot only harm an organization, it can also kill an organization. So understanding climatic patterns is very important when anticipating change, according to Simon Wardley, because understanding the climatic patterns gives us an idea where the landscape can change and where to invest. So with the previously created Wardley map of a conference event planner solution, the following points of potential evolution might appear. So one point could be that cloud-hosted services are reflecting the climatic patterns of everything evolves through supply and demand competition. So what was decades ago non-existing evolved through the genesis, custom build, became product and rental, and now commodity and utility. On the other side, with serverless technologies, compute platform became a utility. And using it in combination with the cloud-hosted services for the search engine and data storage and message broker components, that enables us, an organization, to offload the management of infrastructure component to the cloud provider. And this fact is then moving to the cloud-hosted services and as utility increases efficiency and reflects the climatic pattern of efficiency enables innovation. Because moving to cloud-hosted infrastructure enables us as a cloud event planning solution provider to focus on, for example, adding new features for existing products or introducing new components. For example, introducing a rating component as a new functionality that enables a new user need and also addresses a new user type, the attendees of the conference. And at the end, creating future source of worth or future source of value as another climatic pattern. But there's something that might hold us back. And this is, as I already introduced with the Nokia example, that is the inertia to change that we must be aware of and we have to understand. So for example, if in our case of the conference event planner solution provider, if on-premise installation at client-hosted infrastructure were highly profitable in the past, inertia to fully transition to cloud-hosted components and infrastructure can appear. So inertia created by past success that we have to be aware of and to work against. So with the understanding of the landscape and the climatic patterns acting on it, next is Doctrine of our strategy cycle. And the Doctrine itself is describing universal basic principles that are applicable to all industry regardless of the context. And applying doctrinal principles makes an organization fit for dealing with strategic concerns and adapting a fast flow of change. So there exists also a catalog of a variety of doctrinal principles, but I just go through some of them, give you a little idea. So one doctrinal principle is knowing your users. So for a business, it's definitely important to know who your users are. Now, for example, your customers, shareholders, business partners, and so on. In our case, it's the users are the conference event planners, the conference organizers, and the speakers and the attendees of the conference. And focus on user needs is another doctrinal principles, and the user needs are the subject area for which we, as an organization, build a product. So they are the why, the purpose of our business domain. Knowing the details in terms of what components are required to fulfill the user needs is another important doctrinal principle. And also challenging assumption by sharing the map with others and discuss it with others with a focus on creating a better map and creating a better understanding. And also using a common language while sharing this map, for example, that enables people with different skill sets to communicate effectively. Another doctrinal principle is based on the fact that there is no one-size-fits-all methods for all evolution stages due to its characteristics that I have demonstrated before. Instead, we need to use appropriate methods per evolution stage, such as building components that are located in Genesis and custom built in-house, preferably using agile methods. Using or buying off-the-shelf products or using open source software for components that are in the product and rental evolution stage with preferably lean methods. And outsourcing components in commodity to utility suppliers and using preferably Six Sigma methods. Another doctrinal principle is breaking the large landscape up into smaller contracts that span several components, and preferably without crossing the stage of evolution within the contract. And these smaller contracts facilitate the application of appropriate methods per evolution stage. And when we come to domain-driven design later, we will see how to decompose a business domain into smaller parts. Thinking small as in teams means that large teams must be broken into smaller teams. We will address this when we come to team topologies. And we need to ensure that teams are intrinsically motivated by providing team members with purpose for action, enabling them to develop mastery, and giving them also autonomy to act. And another doctrinal principles is optimizing flow, and this is done by removing bottlenecks and increasing throughput wherever possible that is necessary to optimize flow. And when we come to team topologies as a third perspective, we will learn how organizational design can optimize for a rapid flow of change. And another doctrinal principle is that an organization should be ideally designed for constant evolution as such that adapting changes does not require to constantly restructure, to constantly reorganize the organization. Instead, we would like that a change can be absorbed gracefully by our organizational design. And the third perspectives emphasize how team topology provides team types and interaction modes that support constant evolution. And talking about applying doctrinal principles, the second and the third perspectives, domain-driven design and team topologies, helps us to apply the doctrinal principles of Wardley mapping. The last section of the strategy cycle is leadership. I don't want to go into detail of that one, just to complete the strategy cycle. So leadership is about strategic decisions that are appropriate for your context. And Simon Wardley has created or has developed context-specific gameplays that represent a collection of scenario plans that help you how to attack a space. And following, as a summary of Wardley mapping, so following the strategy cycle, we are now in a position of understanding the why of our business, the purpose, and the landscape we are, as an organization, are operating in, that is visualized with the Wardley map. We are now able to anticipate some form of change thanks to the climatic patterns, and we are able to understand universal doctrinal principles that we, as an organization, need to apply to structure our organization for adapting to a fast flow of change. And in the end, with learning the context-specific forms of gameplay, we are then finally then ready to decide and act strategically. So the next perspective, I'm coming back, by the way, with the Wardley map during all the examples, so they are kind of like intervened. But the next perspective that I would like to bring in now is to build adaptive system is the software design and architecture perspective with domain-driven design. And in this perspective of domain-driven design, I am mainly focusing on the upper part of our previously created Wardley map, focusing on partitioning the core conference event planner component into smaller modular components and applying also doctrinal principles of Wardley mapping. So domain-driven design in general is about designing software based on domain models, first proposed by Eric Evans. And domain-driven design comes with a core statement: in order to build better software, we have to align its software design with the business domain, with the business needs, and the business strategy. And domain-driven design helps us to apply doctrinal principles of Wardley mapping as well. But before we develop a solution, before we diving in to technically solve a problem, what I tend to do sometimes, I have to admit, that solves the user needs, we have to understand the problem domain first. And that's where domain-driven design comes in, where the collaboration between the domain experts and the development teams, this is an essential part to analyze the problem domain, to obtain domain knowledge. And this domain knowledge that we have obtained during the collaboration, this is described in the terms of the shared language, the ubiquitous language. And domain-driven design comes with strategic and tactical patterns and practices. And we can start in the problem space of strategic design. That's where we analyze and distilling the problem domain by partitioning the problem domain into smaller subdomain. But not all subdomains are equal. Some of them are more valuable to the business than others. So we have different types or different categories of subdomains, such as core, supporting, and generic subdomains. So the core domain, that is the essential part of our problem domain, providing competitive advantage. That are those parts of the system that make it a success. And it should be hard for competitors to copy or imitate, and it's supposed to be quite complex. They tend to change often. And so the core domain, that is the part of our system that we have to strategically invest in most and innovate on. So that is the subdomain of our system, or the core domains are the subdomains of our system we need to build in-house, and they're supposed to go into the genesis and the custom build evolution stage. The supporting subdomain helps to support the core domain. They do not provide any competitive advantage. They are quite simple. They do not change often. And if possible, we should look out for buying off-the-shelf products or using open source software that goes then into the product and rental evolution stage. If this is not possible, and if we have to custom build the supporting subdomain, we should not invest heavily in that part of the system because it's not providing competitive advantage. The generic subdomains, that are subdomains that many large business systems have, for example, authentication or payment handling. So they aren't core and they provide no competitive advantage, but businesses cannot work without them. So they are generally complex, but already solved by someone else. So we have to focus for the components that are related to a generic subdomain, that we should focus on buying off-the-shelf products or using open source software or outsourcing to commodity suppliers. So there is no need for innovation here for the generic subdomain. So these different subdomain categories, core, supporting, and generic, they can help us prioritizing the development effort, because the most development effort should be channeled towards the core domain, where their related components later on I come to bonded context, where we have to strategically invest in most and where our most development effort goes into. So let's derive the subdomain categories of our conference event planner. So in the context of the conference event planner, managing the call for papers, the CFP, the submission handling, session evaluation, and schedule building can be considered as core domains. And so they shall represent the differentiators to our competitors. That means using or buying off-the-shelf products or outsourcing these parts of the conference event planner to utility suppliers that would jeopardize our business success. Instead, it's worth custom building these core domains in-house to be able to deliver a specialized differentiating solution, creating competitive advantage. On the other side, communicating with the speakers could be a candidate for a supporting subdomain. So this messaging or communication subdomain does not give a competitive edge, but it supports the core domain's success in such a way that it eases the interaction between the conference organizers and the speakers during the conference event planning process. And the subdomain of sending messages back and forth allows a rather simple business logic so that their related development effort is fairly limited. Signing in and signing up is a potential candidate for generic subdomain. This subdomain is not core to the business, but without registration and authentication, the conference event planning solution does not work securely. And many business systems need this subdomain, and they potentially, doesn't have to be, but potentially they are consisting of a rather complex business logic, but there exists already several solutions on the market. So when going further down, we are switching to the solution space of strategic design, where we decompose our system into modular components, the bounded context. A subdomain itself can contain ideally one bounded context, can also be composed of more than one bounded context, and a bounded context itself forms a boundary around the domain model. So let's address domain model first before we go to the bounded context. A domain model itself is at the center of domain-driven design and represents the domain logic and the business rule that are relevant to that part of the system. And it's not a one-to-one copy of the real world. Instead, it's an abstraction of the respective, of the related subdomain. And the domain model itself comes in different shapes. So the domain model is first formed as an analysis model during the collaboration between the domain experts and the development teams. For example, it could be wireframes, product sketches, or UML diagrams. And later on, this can result into a code model that is representing the domain model itself. And what both have in common, the domain model in general, either as an analysis model or a code model, they are described in terms of the shared language between that the domain experts and the development teams share between each other, the ubiquitous language, and it's free of any technical complexities and free of any technical jargon. But a domain model cannot exist without a bounded context, without a boundary, and that's where we come to the bounded contexts. A bounded context defines where a single domain model can be applied and forms a unit of purpose, mastery, and autonomy. And it can provide different types of boundaries. So a bounded context, for example, can form a linguistic and semantic boundary so that the language's terms of a domain model are only consistent inside of its bounded context. It also serves as an ownership boundary. So, for example, a bounded context should be implemented, evolved, and maintained by one team only. However, one team can own multiple bounded contexts. Bounded contexts also serve as a physical boundary and can be implemented as separate solutions. And not all bounded contexts are sharing the same architectural or business logic implementation patterns. Instead, these can differ for every bounded context. So deriving domain models and their related bounded context is a non-trivial task, and it's okay not to get it right at the first shot. So that's a very incremental process while gaining domain knowledge during the collaboration between the domain experts and the development teams. Addressing the question of what is the main outcome when we have fulfilled the user needs, that can start the conversation between the domain experts and development teams about domain models and bounded context. And there are different techniques available to derive domain models and bounded contexts, such as event storming, domain storytelling, example mapping, user story mapping, and so on. So in our example, we might have derived session handling, CFP management, session evaluation, schedule management, messaging, and identity and access as bounded contexts. And with the previously identified subdomain categories of core, supporting, and generic, we can now place our bounded context in its related evolution stage. So the core domain-related bounded contexts are going to be built in-house, and they shall go into the custom-built evolution stage. For the supporting subdomains related bounded contexts of messaging, we could use already available off-the-shelf products or using open source solutions, but we might decide to custom build it since we require some sort of specialization. So that's up to the business strategy that you are following. So the messaging bounded context can go into the custom build evolution stage if you plan to build it in-house, but it should have quite simple business logic requiring little development effort, since it does not provide any competitive advantage. And the identity and access management bounded context, that is the part of the generic subdomain. And there exists already several solutions on the market already. And we could decide to use an open source solution. So that goes then into the product and rental evolution stage. And to coming back to Wardley mapping, to have the connection between them as well, is that domain-driven design also helps us to apply doctrinal principles of Wardley mapping already through the nature of domain-driven design center, where we have the close collaboration between the domain experts and the development teams, and that supports with analyzing the business domain and also challenge assumptions. And through the collaboration, we are gaining domain knowledge, and that let us getting and knowing the details of the business domain. And this domain knowledge is free of any technical jargon and terms. So instead it's described in terms of the shared language, the ubiquitous language, and enables us using a common language. Discovering the core domain, providing competitive advantage, let us focus on high situational awareness and understand our landscape we are operating and competing in. So it lets us understand where we are standing compared to our competitors. Decomposing our system into modular components, the bounded context, that enables us to partition our landscape into smaller contracts. And since bounded contexts form a unit of mastery, of purpose, mastery, and autonomy, that conforms with the related doctrinal principles of Wardley mapping. And the categories of the subdomains mapped to their evolution stages reveal where to strategically invest in most development effort, where it makes more sense to buy off-the-shelf products or use open source software, and where to outsource to utility suppliers in order to use appropriate methods per evolution stage. So in general, bringing the other perspective now into this discussion. So when building systems that are amenable for a rapid flow of change, we need to consider that systems not only consist of technology, but also of people and teams and their interaction with each other. So we are in general dealing with socio-technical systems where organization design and team structure have an impact on the technical architecture. And when talking about organizational design and its impact, we have to bring in the importance of Conway's law. So Conway's law states that the organizational design and its communication path, communication structure have a huge impact on the system design. And when we design a system, we also need to focus on the team structure, the communication dependencies and coordination dependencies, and the overall flow of work. And we definitely need to have to optimize for fast flow of change. We need to identify bottlenecks in our organizational design and eliminate them. So to optimize for flow of change, that requires that we need to avoid functional silo teams with handovers. Instead, we need to aim for autonomous cross-functional teams that are designing and developing, testing, deploying, and operating their system that they are responsible for. We need to avoid handover so that work is never handed off to another team during implementing a change or delivering a change, because that impedes the flow of change. We also need to use small, long-lived teams as a standard, and the teams themselves, they need to own the system or subsystem they are responsible for. So they have to have an end-to-end responsibility to achieve fast flow. And we need to reduce the team's cognitive load. So if the team's cognitive load is largely exceeded, that becomes then delivery bottlenecks, leading, for example, to delays, quality issues, but also affecting the team's motivation as well. And another aspect is usually you hear, like, we have to increase our communication between the teams. And in fact, it's not what you really should aim for to achieve, because so while the communication within the team is highly desired, we have to restrict a high bandwidth communication between the teams to enable fast flow. So fulfilling these requirements, team topologies, as a third perspective, can help us with. And this brings us then to the next perspective of team organization with team topologies. Matthew Skelton and Manuel Paich published the book Team Topologies in 2019. And they describe team topology as an approach that advocates for organizational design that optimize for flow of change and feedback from running systems. Team topology focused on 4 team types and 3 interaction modes that enables an organization to adapt and deliver changes quickly. So one of the team types, of the 4 team types, are the streamlined teams. The streamlined teams are aligned to a continuous stream of work. And stream of work could be a product, could be a service, a set of features, a user journey, a user persona, and so on. So the streamlined teams, they have end-to-end responsibility for building, deploying, running, supporting, and retiring that stream of work. So the streamlined teams, they aim to produce a steady flow of feature deliveries and incorporating feedback from previous releases. And they are autonomous cross-functional teams consisting of a mix of generalists and a few specialists. The next team type are the platform teams, and they are responsible for platforms that usually abstracts away infrastructure and networking or cross-cutting capabilities. And they provide internal self-service services and tools for using that platform that they're responsible for. And that's, for example, the streamlined team can then easily consume. So the platform team, they enable the autonomy of streamlined teams and to reduce their cognitive load. The enabling team, they help mostly streamlined teams to acquire missing capabilities. So they make suggestions on tooling and practices, frameworks, or setting up a skeleton for deployment pipelines or basic test frameworks. And their goal is as well to increase the autonomy of the Streamlined teams and reduce their cognitive load. Then we have, as a fourth team type, the complicated subsystem team. This is an optional team type. So they are supporting Streamlined teams on particularly complicated subsystems that require specialized knowledge. And so a complicated subsystem could be face recognition engine, a video processing codec, a mathematical model, and so on. So the aim of the complicated subsystem team is also to reduce the cognitive load of the Streamlined team that working on systems that use the complicated subsystem that this team is responsible for. So while the Streamlined team is focusing on the flow of changes and aims to produce a steady flow of feature delivery, incorporating feedback from previous releases constantly, they can't do it without the help of the other teams. So the other teams are there to help to increase the autonomy and reduce the team's cognitive load of the Streamlined team. So to arrange teams into the team types is not enough to become effective in general. So how these teams are interacting with each other and when to change and evolve team interaction is very relevant for high effectiveness. And so, for example, there's one interaction mode that addresses collaboration. So with collaboration, teams are working very closely together, aiming the same goal, but preferably only for a limited period of time. So collaboration is very suitable for rapid discovery and innovation, for example, when exploring new technologies. X as a service as the second interaction mode, that suits very well when one team needs to use a code library, a component, an API, or platform that can be effectively provided by another team as a service. And X as a service works best where predictable delivery is needed. Then we have the third interaction mode of facilitating. And this interaction mode comes into play when one team would benefit from the active help of another team. And this interaction mode is very typical for enabling teams. So the combination of the well-defined team types and the well-defined interaction modes, they promote, in general, organizational effectiveness. So let's put this now together. So let's put the three perspectives of Wardley mapping and domain-driven design and team topologies together. So we are going to use the previously created Wardley map of our conference event planner solution. And now we are bringing in the team topologies perspective as well. So one of the first steps of applying team topologies is identifying suitable streams of work representing a flow of change. And the type of streams, they might differ from organization to organization. So these could differ. They could be task-oriented or role-oriented or activity-oriented stream types and so on. And in our case, the identified user needs of our Wardley map, they are composing an activity-oriented user journey that are indicating good candidates for suitable stream of work. The next step of applying team topologies is finding suitable team boundaries. And as mentioned earlier, we need to mind Conway's law and the communication structures and avoiding functional silo teams with handover, which will impede the flow of change. So, and as we have identified our bounded context with bringing in the domain-driven design perspective, these bounded contexts, they serve very well as a well-defined ownership boundaries, forming a unit of purpose, mastery, and autonomy. So these bounded contexts, they indicate good themes to split the system into smaller parts and work as suitable team boundaries for streamlined teams. To optimize for team cognitive load, we have to establish clear responsibility boundaries and limit the number, the size, and also the complexity of software system a team has to work with. And for clear responsibility boundaries, we need to assign each bounded context to a single team and not share bounded contexts across teams. That will then diffuse the ownership of teams. However, one team can own several bounded contexts. But when we own several bounded contexts, we have to mind the team's cognitive load, that it's not too much cognitive load that we have to deal with. The next step is identifying services that are needed to support a reliable flow of change. And that brings us the focus on the infrastructure and platform-related components of our Wardley maps that are located mostly in product and rental and commodity and utility evolution stages. And in order to be able to focus on a fast flow of change, the Streamlined teams, they are relying then on a platform team providing an easily consumable platform as a service. We need to mind the dependency and communication bandwidth between the teams, and we have to address the questions, are there tightly coupled or blocking dependencies or high amount of ongoing communication between teams? If that's the case, then we need to eliminate these blocking tightly coupled dependencies between teams. And also the next step is also identifying capability gaps and helping teams acquiring missing capabilities. That could be then the responsibility of enabling team. And depending on the context, it might make sense to start with part-time enabling teams, but can later result in full-time enabling teams. So the previous consideration might result in this illustrated team constellation. So the four core domain related bounded contexts residing in the custom build evolution stage are going to be split among two streamlined teams. If at some point the team's cognitive load might exceed, so it's necessary to assign one core domain related bounded context to one streamlined team only. But you can also let the teams decide how much they would like to cover. The supporting and generic subdomain related bounded contexts of this example are then going to be handled by another streamlined team, and the infrastructure components will be taken care of platform teams, and depending on their team cognitive load, either by one or multiple platform teams. So let's address now how a flow of change would flow through our system. And when we bring back the applied climatic patterns, when we talked about Wardley mapping, they can be used as identifying points of potential change on our Wardley map. And we have identified some points of a potential change by transitioning to serverless and to cloud-hosted services. So let's see how gracefully our organizational design would absorb this infrastructure change through a team topologies evolution. To execute this transition, we are doing a team approach first. And as a first step, we could, just an example, convert our separate platform teams into one cloud platform team that collaborates closely together with one of the streamlined teams for rapid discovery of the new serverless technology stack. As soon as the serverless technology is better understood, through discovery, they go to the limited collaboration mode. And this evolves to X as a service once the serverless technology is more established in the organization. The cloud platform team can also facilitate other streamlined teams, for example, by coaching them how to use a new build pipeline in a serverless ecosystem. And the Streamlined team that previously collaborated with the platform team to discover new serverless technologies at the beginning can now facilitate the other Streamlined teams to coach them about good practices to implement serverless function, for example, in a hexagonal architecture. So with serverless, the entire infrastructure is now fully managed, and we can now move the component from product and rental to the commodity evolution stage. And our team structure and our software design and architecture is able to gracefully absorb that transition to serverless and cloud-hosted services. So the combination of the 4 fundamental team types and in its interaction modes, they promote organizational effectiveness and help us to apply the doctrinal principles of water mapping, such as in Think Smallest Team, optimize for flow, provide purpose mastery and autonomy, and also design for constant evolution, where the changes could flow through our organization without the need for constant restructuring and reorganization, and instead gracefully absorbing that change in through the evolution of team topologies. So in summary, the combination of water mapping, domain-driven design, and team topologies that provides, from my perspective or my view, a very powerful, holistic tool set to design, build, and evolve adaptive systems and team structures that are optimized for a fast flow of change, and with a focus on improving the performance of the system as a whole and not taken parts separately. And with this saying, thank you so much for listening and for your patience.
No, it was great. Thank you, Susanne.
Thank you.
Thank you for still being here.
Great.
So we have 2 questions, I think, in the Q&A. The first one, it's Laurent Valdez that asks you, how does it relate to methods like TOGAF or TOGAF and the enterprise continuum?
Laurent, I have to admit, Laurent, I am not an expert in TOGAF and enterprise continuum. So I wanted to look into that one because I know that's when I go into larger corporates, that always comes along, and I have to relate this to that one. Maybe the next talk will be big about it. I'm sorry about this. I can't answer that one right now.
Maybe one thing about that, because I used to be a TOGAF certified. I was constrained by my former bank.
Okay.
We were forced to, okay.
There's no judgment from my side at all. So it's just, I'm very curious about this, your perspective.
Actually, before agility, there was UP, unified process, tons of artifacts, very heights, weights, methodology with tons of steps, and the reaction of the people to unified process was basically agility. And I would say that the reaction of people with TOGAF is a little bit like the same, and led to more agile approaches, combination of techniques, of inspiration, like you've made between Wardley's map, team topologies, and DDD. So TOGAF really, it's not fun. It's complicated. I won't recommend anyone to use TOGAF now in 2021. It's complicated, not agile, heavyweight. It's a little bit nightmare, I would say, for many reasons. I've published a blog post about that more than a decade ago, so I can push it to the community if they want more details, but escape from TOGAF if you can. If you
okay. I will note this down.
Just before the next question, I put a link for you guys, attendees, you can give us your feedback. So do not hesitate to go. It's a free and open source app, so it doesn't require identification or anything else. You just can put points, dots. So go there and give us your feedback. And for Susanne, for course. Next question, still Laurent. Maybe Laurent can speak with us if he wants. I don't know, Thomas. But
yes. Let me check, Laurent.
The question is for Susanne. Some people are also describing this as being data literate. Is domain knowledge linked to this? Laurent, if you want to add.
If it's complicated, never mind. If you don't have the mic or whatever, we can continue.
It depends on what you mean by data literate. So I can. So domain knowledge itself, it's about sharing a common understanding of what's happening, what's the behavior within your business domain and your problem domain. So that you don't have this data heavy perspective, but more a behavioral perspective when we talk about domain knowledge and deriving domain models and their bounded context. It's more about, for example, with event storming, that you are try to use this kind of lightweight designing model with posters on a wall across a chronological timeline, where you identify what happens, what kind of domain events happens along a user journey, along a timeline. And it's more behavior focused than data focused in the very beginning, and later on it's completing the data perspective. But in the beginning, it's more the behavioral perspective that domain-driven design is focusing on, and that is then shaped into domain models that are reflecting the business rules and the business logic of a specific part of the system. I don't know if I have answered your question.
Does it answer to the question, Laurent?
Yes, he writes to us. Thank you.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. Next question, though, from Yaron. How can you not constantly restructure an organization if the products evolve constantly and thus will need different roles and processes? Scrum towards Six Sigma, for example.
Yeah. So that is that you usually have, as I mentioned, like that, use appropriate methods per evolution stage. So, for example, using building the components of the evolution stage in Genesis and custom built in-house with preferably agile methods, then the components in product and rental with lean methods, and commodity and utility outsourcing or using Six Sigma methods. And so it's not only these methods, but also what Simon Wardley comes up with is another that we don't have one culture that spreads all evolution stages. So it's he also says thinking aptitude and attitudes in terms of like, it's not only the skill set that is relevant to teams, but also the attitude, your mindset. And for example, he says that thinking aptitude and attitude means that, for example, I guess that's also Peter's next question is about like the pioneers, settlers and town planners attitude that you have in place. So for example, you have the pioneers, the people with a pioneers mindset. They are addressing components mostly in Genesis and custom build. They are really fine. They are very happy with constantly exploring, with experimenting, with failures, and they with discovery mode and using agile methods, for example. So this is more related to these kind of like attitude-related teams. And then in product and rental, that is where you're maturing your product, where it's more like that you make the proof of concept, the product itself, that comes then back to the settlers, and then the town planners that are very, very happy with stable domains and to standardized components and so on. So it's and if you restructure your organization with this aptitude and attitude in mind, that means that that the pioneers are the teams that you place around the pioneers mindset. They address mostly the agile methods, for example. So that does not mean that you have like one team at the town planners that they go then in exploration mode. Even though what is possible is that some people of one team can go into another team, but usually they remain the same. So they remain stable teams. And so while a component evolves from one evolution stage to the other, it's not a matter of weeks or months. It's sometimes years, right? That a component evolves from one evolution stage to the other. So then it will be handed over by another team, and it does not require constant constant restructuring or reorganization. Instead, it's just kind of like the aptitude and attitude mindset that you can reflect in your teams as well. Taking care of that one. And then, sorry, I hope that I was answering your question.
You can go, Susanne.
So the other question from Peter is about if I see a relationship between the different twin topology team types. And Simon Wardley's, as I already introduced, the pioneers, settlers, and town planners models. And yes, there are some relationship between them. So that we have those, for example, because I told you like the platform teams themselves, they are usually they are abstracting away infrastructure components and networking and cross-cutting capabilities. These are mostly components that are residing in the product and rental and commodity and utility evolution stage on the right side of the Wardley map. And so they are where we have like settlers and town planners more like related in the platform teams itself, that can go like in the platform team related aspects. But on the other side, there is, as I addressed in the team topologies evolution, they can also discover new technologies together in collaboration when they go into collaboration mode for a specific limited time with the Streamlined teams as well. So it might change that also. It does not always say like, okay, a platform team member is always a town planner. It could change, like they can also go in collaboration mode and discovery, and then also more go towards the pioneers or settlers, depending on what components they would like to introduce. So yeah, there is, I would say there is a relationship. I don't know if it's like, okay, not like binary, but definitely that you have these pioneers more working on their streamlined teams, or it could also be settlers, and town planners more related to platform teams, but it also depends on the context. It might change sometimes. It's not always the case, okay, 100% town planners and platform teams, but it's kind of like correlation, a little bit, kind of correlation, yes, I would say.
I think there are similarities also with Ken Beck XXX model. I don't know if you heard about that, explore, expand, and extract. And basically Ken Beck is saying that you have various stages, and then you should not apply the same methodologies and way of working, whether you have, he's not talking about pioneers, settlers, and town planners, but it's the same, explore, expand, extract. I think there are lots of common.
Yeah, and you always, like from organization, you always say, we want to go agile from organization, like, okay, wait, your entire organization, that makes no sense, right? So, and it's sometimes really like that, really the context matters, and what kind of what evolution stage you would like to apply this method. And it makes no sense when going to commodity and utility to address agile method on that part.
Absolutely.
Another question, but in the chat, do you have any book or article reference for Warldey mapping? And also, can you tell us about your new book?
Oh, well, it's not a sales pitch here, by the way. So yeah, there are definitely a lot of resources that I can share later on as well, was from Simon Wardley himself. So he published his book as under Creative Commons license. I can share the link later on. But there are great material also. LearnWardleyMapping.com. Then Ben Mosier from Hyatt Thought. He's doing a lot of providing a lot of great content, and he also has this YouTube channel as well. And yes, at the end, I'm also writing a book about this topic, about my talk. And I'm still in the process. I'm sorry about that. I'm very late, but it's going to be published next year. And that's what I have addressed today in this talk. It will be addressed in the book as well, but it was more like I also talk about think, attitude, and attitude as well, and also how to apply different form of changes, and like what about how does a behavioral change, like a function adjustment, will flow through our system. And I will talk about context maps as well, reflecting the interactions between the bounded contexts, and also apply to evolution stages. When does it make sense to have a conformist to what component in the evolution stage do not conform to components on the left side of the Warldey map, because you have to constantly adjust to the fast flow of changes. But it's so it's something that I bring in this perspective in my book, and hopefully I will finish this soon so that you can read it next year.
Next year is in 3 months, right?
Oh gosh! Oh gosh, I have to go.
By the way, for people talking French and interested in Warldey mapping, we have already made a dedicated event with Thomas Wickham that was very enlightful. So I would recommend you to people, French people in the audience, to have a look at the YouTube video about that.
1 year ago, I think, no, Thomas?
Sorry?
It was 1 year ago?
Something like that, yeah. And it was very, very nice way of putting it and making it discovery with some exercise, and yeah.
Awesome. Do you have a link to those precious slides? Because I think everyone loved your slides and your presentation. So if you
thank you so much.
Yes,
yeah, I'm scribbling them by myself, by the way. So it's except for the first one, this is a different one from Systems Thinking Lens. But yeah, I'm scribbling them. Yes, I am going to share my slides with you. I guess then you can I make them available for you. So no problem.
Thank you so much.
I'm happy to share them.
I have one question, if it's okay for you, Estelle. It's did you ever experience a situation where transversal teams were not valued as much as streamlined teams? In some organizations, everything that is transversal is maybe less appreciated and valued. Did you experience that, and you have some kind of mitigation?
You mean that platform teams, for example, are less valued in organizations, less visible teams to the end-to-end flow, creating direct value to the customers?
Absolutely.
Yes, there's always a challenge. So what I think, I don't know if it's very, but it really depends on, to be honest, of how technical savvy so in my experience, it's correlated how technical savvy the CEOs and CIOs were in the organization. But it's sometimes, yes, it's always a constant communication, and make it transparent how important is the interaction. As I said, like from a systems thinking lens, it's not taking the parts separately. It's the product is their interactions between each other, right? So that how the fits parts fit together, that they are determining the performance of the system. And I always try to explain this to the people, that it's not only the features that comes up, it is also, it's required to build to establish the platform teams as well. And I always, because sometimes it's very good to have the business value related to how important this is to increase software delivery performance. I often bring in the Accelerate book from Dr. Nicole Forsgren, Jess Humble, and Jean Kim. They have written a book about where they reveal that software delivery performance has a huge impact on the profitability, the productivity, and the market share of an organization. And I always try to link it that it's not only the feature that you deliver, but how fast can you deliver this feature? How effective can you make a change? How fast can you make a change effective? And that's where platform teams help a lot. And they are necessary, they are required to increase the software delivery performance, and also bringing in the effectiveness and efficiency into the discussion, that they have to be aware that it's an interaction of all teams that makes an organization effective and performant. So yeah, it's something that I have a lot of discussion about this one as well. Yeah, and also to bring back the awareness that it's all team types are very, very necessary for supporting a steady flow of changes.
Okay. I don't know if we have other questions, because I have another one on my side.
Just an information for all of us. The meetup is recorded and it will be on YouTube. Thank you, Susanne, again, to be able to put it online. And you have also on YouTube, we can use the subtitle, and we can have in French, so it will be better for us to understand well with a second view. So we'll put the link in the meetup event, or maybe Thomas will put the link. So do not hesitate to go there and watch another time.
Yeah, maybe I have one more question for Susanne, if it's okay for both of you. Okay, it's basically how did you end talking about these topics? I mean, can you tell us more about behind the curtains, your experience? How does it help you to observe or to try things, and to write a book about that?
How crazy! So for me, I'm a very so I need visualization. So whenever I try to understand a problem, or whenever I would like to discuss a problem with someone else, I need to have a visualization, and I need to understand the context where I am located. And so that's how it started. At the beginning, it started with Wardley mapping and domain-driven design, because so when I first started with domain-driven design, I guess I have read the Blue Bible from Eric Evans. I've started it 4 times, I guess, until I finished it. So because there are so many new terms that came along, and I wanted to have a visualized approach, how to go from the problem space of strategic design to solution space, and then to solution space of technical design. I have not touched technical design today, but Wardley mapping was helping me on the one side to address, like, okay, let's the problem domain are the users with the user needs, and then go further down, splitting into modular components, and then deriving domain models and bounded contexts, and they are fulfilled, they are relating, or they are requiring other components in the value chain, and having this always having this perspective of the user in front of me. That was very helpful for me, because I don't know, sometimes I tend to solving something from bottom up. So that's also fine. It's kind of iterative, right? It's not only top down, it's also, it goes this way, right? Along the process. But specifically in the beginning of my career, I was first thinking about how to solve this problem, which I don't know technically. Like, okay, let's go on Kubernetes first. Like, what kind of user need does this fulfill, by the way? So, and to have first, like, to have a visualized form and have the user and the user needs in your focus while you try to understand the problem domain, and also bringing in different types, like the domain experts into, also the business strategists as well, into the discussion, helped me a lot to understand the problem far better than just solving something that you are not knowing that you don't know it. And it's something with the unknown unknowns, right? And so it was a kind of like iterative, sequential process. And then when team topology came out, it was like, oh no, that were all the problems that I did wrong when I used to be a startup CTO years ago. And so we had with this challenge of transferring our monoliths to microservices. And at that moment, we were just a small team, and we had to address all the infrastructure and operational complexities and all at once. So, and it's like, okay, the Streamlined teams that we didn't have, and the platform team that we didn't have, it's all combined in one team, and cloned to every team itself. So it was really so much team cognitive load involved that we did not really move forward. So it was kind of like puzzle pieces. And then I established this kind of picture. They really, from my perspective, they really fit very well together because they support each other very well, and because you have to have this kind of holistic perspective that is focusing on the socio-technical system, also from a system thinking lens of looking at the system as a whole instead of like only separate part, trying to improve them taken separately. I don't know if I've answered your question. It's a long, answer to the question. Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
But yeah, it was just a kind of like organically evolving this idea and then applying it step by step to my clients as well.
Okay, great.
It's
Thank you very much.
One last question from Laurent. Do you have a name for this Warldey plus DDD plus team topology combination? Have you named it?
I'm not sure if this is the correct name, but the subtitle of my book is Architecture for Flow. Is this something? Yeah. Maybe this is a test balloon. Does it make sense? That's something that's the tentative title so far. But that was one brief word.
Okay. Architecture for flow. It's nice. Okay.
But I'm happy to get your feedback on that one. So, but I usually have this very long title: Adaptive System with Wardley mapping, domain-driven design, and team topologies. So, and this shorter title is.
I'm agree with Jerome. Sometimes we have too many names into one big methods, and I think it lost the real, I don't know how to
meaning or the real
the real meaning. So architecture from flow, it's really
and architecture is not only restricted to software architecture, it's also the organizational architecture itself. So
enterprise architecture, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much once again.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for your patience and staying online till.
It was our pleasure. Our pleasure.
And be there for our next meetup. So we will have Julien Topsu, he will talk about REST and DDD. So I think we will put the next event when we have the date, and you see on the meetup site. And again, thank you so much, Susanne.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. And thank you for all the questions. Very interesting.
Thanks to the audience, absolutely, for the questions. Good night, everyone.
Have a good night.
See you soon.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Cheers. Bye. So I need to cut YouTube up.
54 attendees.
Yeah.
Wow, great night.